Right. Okay then. So it's coming up to midday now, and I've come away from Facebook so that I don't get distracted by seeing myself on the screen. And I can see we had 16 people joining us so far. So welcome to everybody who's joining us today for this special Facebook Live about bedwetting and supporting children, particularly as they go back to school. Because for anybody who may have joined us back in May or would like to go back and watch the recording of the video that we did in May, which is still within the ERIC UK Facebook page, you can find it on the videos. Davina from Bladder and Bowel UK, who I'll let you introduce yourself in a moment, Davina. Davina joined me in a special event alongside World Bedwetting Day, a global initiative to raise awareness of bedwetting as a medical condition which should be treated from the age of 5. And we had lots of great questions back in May, didn't we, which we ran through. So for anybody who sort of wants more of a general understanding of how you can support a child who's bedwetting, all the different sort of things that you can do to promote dryness, I would really urge you to go back and watch that. But the focus of this one is more about children. They've had that long summer break. Perhaps you've been using a bedwetting alarm, or you've been working on their drinking, and perhaps they've had some dry nights, and now you're thinking, going back to school, what might be different? Could that change, the change in their routine, perhaps getting more tired, could have an impact on them? And we know from the calls that we get to both our helplines that this is an issue for lots of families. So Davina, if you could just introduce yourself, please, and then we'll crack on with the questions.
Thanks, Alina. Hello, everybody. I'm Davina Richardson. I'm a children's specialist nurse. I've worked with children who've got bladder and bowel issues for quite a few years now, and I currently work as a specialist nurse for Bladder and Bowel UK. We are part of the national charity Disabled Living. We're one of the services of that charity, and we provide support, advice, information and signposting for anyone of any age affected by a bladder or bowel condition. And I'm delighted to be here with you today, Alina, to talk about bedwetting.
Brilliant. Thanks, Davina. And just to introduce myself, my name's Alina Linden. I joined ERIC, the Children's Bowel and Bladder Charity, about 8 years ago, starting on their helpline, and now I'm the communications manager. So I do the odd Facebook Live, things like this, to sort of keep my hand in with helpline things. But I will be deferring to you, Davina, as the expert today, and we've had some questions in already. So I will go with the first one. Which is, so my daughter is going to be 6 in September. She's dry in the day, but still in pull-ups at night. How do I encourage her to become dry at night?
Well, I think the first thing to think about is that we can't teach children to be dry at night in the same way that we teach them to be dry in the day. But there are some things we can do to help them to become dry at night. So one is make sure they're drinking really well during the day. And for children of about 6 or just coming up to 6, that should be about 1.5 or 1.25 to 1.5 litres of water-based drinks a day. They should be divided up evenly. So I drink roughly every couple of hours, so 6 to 8 drinks a day in total, with the last drink about an hour before bedtime. We suggest that children avoid caffeinated and fizzy drinks wherever possible. That's because caffeine encourages the kidneys to make more urine, but can also irritate the lining of the bladder, and fizzy drinks can irritate the lining of the bladder. And we need to remember that caffeine isn't just in coffee. It's in tea, it's in hot chocolate, it's in cola, and it's in a lot of energy drinks as well. So avoiding all of those can help. You know, special treat, fine, but avoid where possible. So the first thing is getting the drinking right. And if you're drinking enough each day, that actually helps the bladder to get more exercise. So it helps the bladder to expand and fill properly, and then contract and empty properly. And we want the bladder to fill regularly and well, because that encourages it to be a good size for the child's age, so it can hold more overnight. The next thing is make sure that your young lady goes to the toilet just before she goes to sleep. So many of our children go to bed really well. They do their teeth, they go for a wee, they get into bed, but then they might have story time, or they might watch a video or play on the iPad. And actually what we want them to do is go for another toilet visit just before they settle to sleep. Good bedtime routines can help for many children. And in fact, the advice now is to try and avoid square screens as well in that hour before bed, because we think that the blue light that comes from the screens can actually upset our nighttime rhythms, and that can possibly have an impact as well. We know that eating a lot of salt and eating a lot of protein can also have an effect. So we suggest that children try to avoid very high salt or very high protein food in that last hour before bed as well. And those are the most important things. We also suggest for young ladies and young gentlemen who are wearing pull-ups that maybe having 3 or 4 nights without them, just to see whether there is a sort of subconscious thing. I've got the pull-up on, so my brain doesn't need to worry too much about waking up when my bladder says it's ready to empty. If your child is still wet after 3 or 4 nights without the pull-ups, then it's absolutely fine to go back to those while you wait for assessment and treatment. And if those first line things that I've suggested don't work, then we do suggest that children and families actually speak to the GP or the school nurse and actually ask what else can be done and whether there can be referral to a local service for more support.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for that, Davina. So in terms of the age of this child, she's 6. And again, we know from callers to our helpline, sometimes with sort of 6, 7-year-old or 5 or 6-year-olds, the doctor or the school nurse might say, actually, let's wait until they're 7. But what would you say about that? This girl's 6, and how about 5-year-old?
We used to traditionally say, you're quite right, traditionally it used to be wait till they're 7 to treat them, and I'm not quite sure why that was. The medical definition for bedwetting is actually to be wet at least 2 nights a week once the child is age 5 or more. So if a child is wet at least twice a week and they're 5 years old or older, then we would actually suggest that they do speak to a healthcare professional about getting some assessment and some management tips for them. So this young lady is nearly 6, so absolutely she's well within the age range that we would start to think about getting treatment. And we would particularly say to the family, do ask for some support and advice if it's upsetting your family's life or if your child's getting upset about it, and that would be absolutely the trigger for asking for some support. So definitely, yeah, if it's causing an impact from the age of 5.
Because the sooner you get your child assessed and begin treatment, then the sooner you should be able to help them get dry. And if there's something underlying, perhaps like constipation, that needs to be resolved, you can get on and start working on that constipation, can't you? So
absolutely, yeah.
And just to add to what Davina said there, both of our websites, so Bladder and Bowel UK and the ERIC website, have a lot of information about bedwetting, and so there's lots to read there before you go ahead and book that appointment with the GP or the school nurse. Wonderful. Okay, so on to the next question now. Right, so my son is 8 and was wetting every night. He is now dry 5 to 6 nights a week and has been using an alarm over the holidays. I am worried he will be too tired to use the alarm when he goes back to school. Can he stop using it now?
Well, we usually recommend an alarm as a treatment for children with bedwetting. It's one of the first line treatments and they are incredibly effective. They're hard work, particularly in the early days when the children might be wet every night or most nights. But once a child gets to the point where they're dry several nights a week, on those nights, although you're setting up the alarm, and we recommend you set up the alarm, that alarm won't disturb the child because the alarm will only cause a disturbance if the child's actually wet. So for this young person who's dry 5 nights a week now, they should have 5 nights where they're sleeping right the way through and no disturbance. So those extra couple of nights of the week where they are being woken up, we would suggest they do continue with the alarm. We normally advise that children and young people use alarms till they've had at least 14 consecutive dry nights. And many services now also suggest that when you get to that point that you actually introduce drinking just before bed if your child isn't already doing so. So where we'd normally say to prevent bedwetting, stop drinking that hour before bed. For the children who are using an alarms and who've become dry, we suggest they have a few sips of water just before they go to sleep and use the alarm. If they're dry with those few sips of water, after a few days, they can increase to a few gulps of water. And then every few days, gradually increase until they're having about half a glass, maybe 100, 150 mils of water. And if they're still dry, then they can stop drinking unless they're thirsty and they can stop using the alarm. And the chances are that's a permanent cure for them. If they do start to wet again, then we suggest they use the alarm again for a few nights. So for this young person to stop using the alarm now would be a real shame. And I think that, we're at school 5 days a week. Getting back into those routines in September is so difficult. We've been used to that free and easy life over the summer. We've been used, lie-ins, later nights, whatever. But actually, we've still got weekends. So this young person could potentially still have a lie-in on a Saturday and a Sunday morning if that fits with the families and what they're doing. And I would suggest that if at all possible, do carry on with that alarm until he's had at least 14 consecutive dry nights, and then consider the bit of drinking before bed, just to reinforce what the bladder's learned and the brain's learned, and hopefully keep him dry permanently.
Sort of waking up that bladder and brain, isn't it, to really remember what they're supposed to be doing. It makes perfect sense. And also, like you say, that this child has done really, really well, haven't they, to work so well with a bedwetting alarm, and they just need to keep going and get through this going back to school bit.
I think the other thing as well is that we don't fully understand how the alarms work, but they do work. And I think if a young person is getting so exhausted that they really need a night's sleep, and to know that they're going to be able to sleep through, then it's not recommended by any of the papers. But I do say to families, if your child's exhausted and it's a choice of giving up the alarm or not using it for a night, then just have that night off, and that's another option.
Yeah, because you don't want them to become resentful of the alarm even more than they might
Absolutely.
already be a little bit. Yeah, you want them
Yeah.
tuned in and sort of happy to work with it. Wonderful, thank you. Right, so the next question. So my daughter is 6 and she has been taking desmopressin since the start of the school holidays, but goes to bed earlier on school nights. Is it okay to still give it when she goes to bed at 7:30 p.m.? She's been having her last drink at 7 p.m. in the holidays. Can she still have a drink then? I think it'd be useful because I don't recall. I think we probably did cover desmopressin, but for anybody listening, perhaps just have a reminder of desmopressin, how it works, and then answer the question. So I will rephrase it again if you need me to, Davina. But
No,
yeah,
that's fine. I mean, I think desmopressin is the other treatment that we use as first line for bedwetting. So alarms aren't suitable for everybody. They work brilliantly for a lot of children, young people. But if it's not an appropriate option for whatever reason, then we have got the desmopressin. Desmopressin is a medicine. It's a medicine that is very similar in structure to vasopressin. And vasopressin is a chemical produced in our brain that goes to our kidneys and tells our kidneys to make less urine. So we make much more vasopressin at night than we do during the day, and that's one of the ways our body actually tells our allows us to sleep, because it tells our kidneys to make less urine. So most of us can sleep all night without needing the toilet. So desmopressin is very like vasopressin. It comes as a tablet or as what's called a melt, and a melt looks a bit like a tablet, but you pop it under your tongue, it dissolves and is absorbed through the membranes in the mouth, and it goes to the kidneys, and it tells the kidneys to make less urine. So desmopressin is a very safe treatment for bedwetting if it's used appropriately. It does have to be prescribed, and we can prescribe it in children from the age of 5. So children who are using desmopressin, they normally take it at bedtime, and they must stop drinking for an hour before they have it, and they mustn't drink for 8 hours after they've had it. Now, the 8 hours after they've had it, they should be asleep anyway. So the reason they have to stop drinking is because it tells the kidneys to make less urine. So if you drink large amounts just before or just after you've had it, your kidneys can't get rid of any extra water your body doesn't need. So it is important they're able to stick to those drinking routines. So for this young person who started taking desmopressin at the beginning of the holidays, it sounds as though it's working quite well for them. Absolutely, they can still take it at bedtime, but they do need to stop drinking an hour before they have it. So if for any reason they can't stop drinking for an hour before they have it, then they shouldn't have it on those nights. So I have worked with young people, for example, who are doing sports, swimming or football. They come home late, they need to go more or less straight to bed, so they're ready for school the next day, but they need a drink because they've been doing lots of running around, lots of exercise. So for those children, if they do need a drink just before sleep, then don't take the desmopressin on those nights, is what we would suggest. And also you shouldn't take desmopressin if you're unwell, particularly diarrhea, vomiting or raised temperature, because you're likely to wake up needing a drink. So absolutely, if desmopressin is helping this young person, absolutely carry on with it, but make sure the drinking does stop an hour before it's taken.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. And desmopressin is something that you need to have prescribed by your GP, isn't it, following an assessment? Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I have another question here, so I've just got to read this on my phone. So I have a 4.5-year-old girl who has damp knickers, not usually soaked through in the day. She has been dry for many months, but this is at least the 4th regression. No apparent triggers, as the latest regression started 4 weeks before she started school. Any help, much appreciated. No UTI. So this is a young person. The parent doesn't mention if it's happening at night, but she's wetting in the day.
Yeah, we do know that bladder problems in the day can affect lots of children. It's very, very common. And for many of the children who've got daytime bladder problems, they also have nighttime problems. So daytime wetting can restart after a child's been toilet trained, or it can continue on occasions after toilet training. And the main cause of that for most children is what we call an overactive bladder. So the bladder wall is basically a muscle, and that muscle should stay soft and stretchy while the bladder is filling. And at the bottom of the bladder is a second muscle, a round muscle that should be squeezed tight shut while the bladder's filling. When we get the message to go to the toilet, the bladder wall muscle starts to tighten and squeeze while the round muscle relaxes and opens, and that allows the urine out. But what can happen to lots of people of all ages, including quite young children, is that during filling, instead of that bladder wall muscle staying soft and stretchy, it gets twitchy and tightens unexpectedly. And if that happens, children are busy, their brains are active and interested in what's going on around them. The children might not notice that they're getting this sudden squeezing of the bladder, so they might do the wee dance, the jiggling in in the seat, or
Grab the
sometimes a little
pants.
boy, sometimes the little boys will grab themselves, or the little girls particularly will squat and put a heel up into their perineum, and the parents will say, you need the toilet, do you need the toilet? And they'll say, no, I don't. And 2 minutes later, they're running in a hurry, and they look like they've left it at the last minute. They might look as though they're being lazy or naughty or can't be bothered to go. But what we actually know is that what's happening is these children are getting these sudden, unexpected twitching in the bladder wall muscle that they don't necessarily recognize immediately. But when they do, they rush to the toilet in a hurry, and it's not them leaving it for last minute or being naughty or lazy. It is the bladder sending them too early. And if they don't get there quickly enough, and the bladder wall muscle triggers the round muscle at the bottom of the bladder, it's time to wee, open up now, then they will get wet on their way. So this problem can be caused by not drinking enough. So it can be caused by concentrated urine. It can be caused by drinking the wrong things, so the caffeine and fizzy we mentioned before. It can be caused by constipation, and I know you mentioned that slightly earlier, Alina, and I didn't mention it in that first question, but constipation is not clearing out the rectum fully, and it can be quite difficult to diagnose in children. And if you're constipated, that will put pressure on your bladder and can cause this problem with daytime wetting. So for this young lady, I would suggest that mum talks to the GP or the school nurse or her other healthcare professional about the problems, and that they asks for an assessment and some treatment for that. The first line treatment for daytime wetting is making sure your child is having a really good amount to drink. So in somebody 4.5, about 200 to 225 mils every couple of hours, and then a toilet visit straight afterwards. And also remind them to go to the toilet if you see them doing the jiggle or the crouch or the grab.
So not to hold on.
Yeah. So to go straight to the toilet. And school also need to know that. For this, presumably this child's going to be starting school. School need to know that there are problems, and maybe send some spare equipment into school so she can get changed. She's not sitting getting sore in damp and uncomfortable clothing.
Yeah, the communication with the school is key, isn't it? So that
Absolutely.
child, that the school know about your child's potential issues, and they're looking out to support them with it, and that you feel reassured that that your child can do things, just like you'd be allowed to go to the toilet exactly when they need to. They're not feeling that they've got to wait, that kind of thing. And I think it's just worth saying, reiterating again, that for anybody who's listening who's got a child who's bedwetting, but they also have got daytime bladder issues, the main focus nearly always has to be to sort out the daytime first, doesn't it? So
Absolutely.
in terms of going for a GP school nurse assessment, the daytime needs to be the thing that gets treated, and then look at if the wetting at night persists, then you're looking into treating it as bedwetting. But chances are that by sorting out daytime bladder issues, you'll either resolve it at night, won't you, or make quite a big difference. So,
not always, actually. No, I think that the thing that parents need to know is that when we're looking at any bladder issue, we will look at the bowel first. So you might turn up and say, my child's got a problem with either day or nighttime wetting, and the first question we like to ask, how are their bowels? Because if we don't treat constipation, if we don't identify it and treat it first, then the children are unlikely to progress. And we know about half of children with problems with the bladder also have an underlying constipation, even if that's not been noticed before. So it's always bowels first, then daytime bladders, and then nighttime wetting. And some children will get better with the bladder if we treat the bowel. Some children will get better with nighttime wetting if we treat the daytime issue, if there is one, but not all of them will. So I don't want parents to have the impression that actually we sorted out the daytime problem, so the nighttime should automatically get better. It doesn't always follow that way. And some children, quite a lot of children, only have a problem with nighttime wetting where there is no problem in the day or no problem we can pick up.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so next question then. I told my son he could start to have sleepovers when he went into year 3, but he still wets the bed. I was told he would probably grow out of it by now. What should I do if he wants to have a sleepover? He is wet 3 or 4 nights a week.
Sleepovers are difficult ones, aren't they? I mean, so many children, young people are very anxious about others finding out they've got this problem because it's considered to be babyish. You know, as a society, we don't talk about bladder and bowels, and we consider you should have grown out of any issues. You should have learnt to be dry by the time you're 3 or 4, and you shouldn't expect to have any problems until you're at least 80 or 90, unless, you know, for some ladies who've given birth, you might have a problem shortly after that.
Big taboo still, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I think for young people, there is this burden of carrying a secret and wanting to take part in what everybody else is doing, but really frightened that others are going to find out. So I think for this young person, the first thing is, are they having any treatment? Have they been assessed? Has somebody looked at what's going on and discussed possible interventions with them? And some of the things we've already talked about might be helpful. Then I think it's up to this mother to have a chat with her son about, is he happy to go? Whose house is he going to? And is he happy for the parent to know there's an issue? And if he's not, then how can we manage this? I mean, I think one of the things children don't tend to do on sleepovers, in my experience, is sleep. And if the problem is with a night, the problem is with when
Be
you're
the way to
asleep.
solve it, yeah.
Yeah,
That night,
absolutely.
one night.
That one night, it may be there's no problem. I would say to him, avoid the fizzy drinks, which are often popular at sleepovers if you can. And it's easy enough to say, well, actually, I don't really like them. Can I just have some orange squash, or can I just have a glass of water instead? What I suggest to a lot of families for any sort of sleepover, be that with cubs, brownies, school trips, is have a big wash bag. Pop a pull-up or something in that wash bag. Take your own sleeping bag with possibly a washable line or whatever as well. And when everybody's getting ready for bed, just nip to the bathroom, pop your pull-up on with your wash bag. So I've forgotten to do my teeth or whatever. Pop it on in private, and then onto your jammies and jump into bed or your sleeping bag, and nobody will as likely to notice. In the morning, if you've been happy to tell the parent, they might wake you up first so that you can go to the bathroom and get yourself up and dressed, and you can be the one helping to make breakfast when everybody else wakes up. Or you can just be very discreet. If you know that the pull-ups don't usually leak for you, then that's absolutely fine. Just get up with everybody else, back to the bathroom. If you've got a bag of some sort of a nappy bag or whatever in your wash bag, you can just pop it in there, tie it up and take it home, and nobody ever needs to know. So I think it's really up to the family to find strategies and decide whether they're happy to discuss with the friend's parents and find a way to manage it. But I think it's got to be an individual decision.
Yes. Yeah, because it's such a shame for these children that they feel like they have to be different and they're missing out. But as you say, there's lots of strategies. I know we published a blog about this a couple of years ago, and we invited parents to give the tips and things that their children had used. One boy would always just take a bottle of water and have that next to him when at the sleepover, and if he had wet, he'd just tip it on his sleeping bag and say, "Oh no, I've had an accident." They'd all laugh and call him clumsy, but actually that was his way of managing it. So I think it's down to that individual child and the family, isn't it?
We've suggested that at times as well. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm slightly more cautious about that in other people's homes than I am in on school trips, because it tends to be carpet on the floor.
Right. Yes.
And it's just so I think it is about, and water's absolutely fine. I certainly wouldn't recommend squash or anything like that. But there are different strategies. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, on to the next question then. So my nurse has said that my daughter should drink water during the day to help her bedwetting. She's starting secondary school next week, and I've heard that they're really strict about not letting the pupils have a drink when they're in the class or between lessons. What should I do?
Oh, this is a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, schools are brilliant at supporting our children and young people. They want the best for them and they want to educate them. Unfortunately, our children and young people are not always as well behaved at school as we might want them to be. And I hear lots of stories from teachers about people playing with water bottles and squirting each other and doing silly things. So some schools now have quite strict rules. I think it's about speaking to the school. I think schools know that well-hydrated children learn better, and that children who are a bit on the dry side, a bit dehydrated, don't tend to concentrate as well and more likely to have headaches and likely to learn less well. So I think it's about having a chat with the school about what are their rules, what do they allow, and making sure that the head of care for this young person actually knows they've got an issue and knows they need to drink regularly. So most secondary schools either have a head of year or a head of pastoral care or a head of house that parents can speak to. And actually discuss what their child's care needs are for any medical issue. So that's what I would suggest, is actually find out exactly what the rules are, make sure your daughter knows. And some schools actually allow children medical passes or timeout cards so that they can access the toilet when they need to, and they can access their drinks when they need to as well. And teachers generally respect those cards without needing to know exactly why the child's been issued with it. So it's back to talk to the school.
That's the communication. And there is a document that, again, both Eric and BBUK have on our websites, which is best practice guidance for all education settings. So that's nursery, schools and colleges, and we've got a huge amount of information in there around rules to do with toilets, drinking, a lot of the things that Davina's just covered. So I will, at the end of the live, I will put links to that within the chat if anybody would like to have a look at that, because it's a very useful document. I think we've probably got time for just about one more question, and I know we've had quite a few more coming through, quite a lot about constipation. So what we will do, unfortunately, we won't have time to cover them now, but I will make sure that we get answers posted to you within the chat. Okay, so just for our final question, my son is 7 and I've asked the GP about his bedwetting, but I have been told he'll grow out of it. Well, when will this happen? He's getting upset about the wetting now because his younger brother is actually dry.
Well, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Because our GPs, we expect them to know something about everything to do with medical conditions in everybody, no matter what age. And traditionally, we did used to say that this was self-limiting, that children would just get better with time. What we now know is that not all children do grow out of wetting. And sadly, it's the children who are wet more nights a week who are least likely to just get better with time. So I would suggest have a look at the Bladder and Bowel UK and the ERIC websites. And there's also another website called Stop Bedwetting, and that's at stopbedwetting.org.uk. Have a look at those websites for information about how to approach things with your GP. But I would maybe go back to the GP and say that, you know, you've listened to this this webinar, sorry, Facebook Live we're on, aren't we? Listen to this, and that we're actually suggesting that children should be offered assessment and treatment from the age of 5, and ask where their local service is for your child and ask for some support for them.
Okay, and they can also quote that there are nice guidelines as well, aren't there, for on this, nice guidelines on bedwetting, which again I'll put in the chat.
There
Okay,
absolutely are.
well, yes, thank you. That's been brilliant, Davina. Thank you so much for answering all those questions. Just to summarise then and sort of round off, so in terms of going back to school, what would your main message be to parents? They've got a child that's either, we've covered a lot about, you know, if they're bedwetting, getting them treated, but how about if they've been doing really, really well over the summer with their bedwetting or using an alarm, using their medication? Just some words of hope, really, that it's not all necessarily going to get so much worse when they go back to school and they're more tired and out of routine for a bit.
Some children do seem to get a little bit worse at the beginning of September, and when they go back to school, absolutely they do. And I think that to say that that doesn't happen probably isn't particularly helpful. It doesn't happen to all children by any stretch. Many continue to do really well, and some children actually do better in term time because they are they're in a really good routine. And that can really help them. That regular, consistent bedtimes, regular, consistent times of the day to drink, to toilet, can be really positive. For those children who do get worse at the beginning of September, what I tend to say to parents is, if you've used an alarm over the holidays, please keep going until your child's had at least 2 or 3 weeks back at school, because sometimes they do get more tired. Their routines are different from the summer holidays, and those nights drawing in as well can actually have an impact. So do keep going with the treatment and until you know that your child's doing really, really well. And don't be despondent. If the child does do worse just in that first couple of weeks of school, just say to them, look, you're tired, you've started a new school, you're back in routine, it's going to be harder work now, you're in year whatever. This is to be expected. It's going to be more difficult for your body and your brain to cope, but things will settle down. And for the vast majority of children who do have a bit of a regression at the beginning of September, they tend to get better within 2 or 3 weeks, particularly if their family can continue any treatment that's been in place and be really positive with them about the progress they've made. And look, we know you can do it. You've done brilliantly. So let's just keep going. It will get better again. And for the vast majority, it does. If it doesn't, then do speak to your healthcare professional about it and see what other options there are for you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Davina. I've really enjoyed doing these last 2 Facebook Lives with you on bedwetting, and I've learned a huge amount, and hopefully the people watching have had their questions answered. And like I said before, any questions that we haven't managed to cover, just check back over the chat and we'll post answers there. All right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah, thank you, Alina.
Yeah, well, good luck to all those children going back to school, and we hope it goes well.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.